Hi, everybody. I had this awesome opportunity to sit down with someone I've known for over 20 years, the very talented Edwin Rosero, who's a very good designer, but also happens to spend a lot of time thinking about the future, thinking about how AI and ML and all these up and coming technology trends will intersect to just impact our lives in many positive and maybe not so positive ways. And so I'd intended to use this opportunity to talk to him about his fantastic work on combining AI generated art with his own talents to create very surreal artistic pieces that you're seeing on screen right now that look really, really cool. But as you'll see shortly, we end up taking some heavy detours and ended up talking a lot more about the future, the power of artificial intelligence and computing, and just a lot of interesting things in general that paint a much bigger picture of what we can do with technology looking ahead. And so, hope you enjoy it. All right, Edwin, nice to meet you after having known you virtually for almost 20 years. I think it's the first time you and I are actually chatting in real time, which is pretty crazy that we never did this before, but it's better late than never, I guess.
Yeah, definitely nice to officially, meet you and put a voice to that face. I think it wasn't for lack of want. Back then, um, bandwidth just didn't exist for us to be able to do have this kind of conversation back then.
No, I mean, I think we used AOL Instant Messenger and chatted quite a bit, with
Yeah.
text. If there was a video button, I think at that point, I'm pretty sure I would have like clicked on that button and made it work. But
I'm pretty sure if that button existed back then, it was like a joke button where like it would like some funny animation would come
yeah,
out or something.
exactly. It'd be like when it was like 240 or 120p video. It'd be like, blocks everywhere. You can't actually,
Right.
it'd be like the pixelated filter that people add as a novelty today. That was the
Yeah.
reality of what video conferencing was for like non-corporate, non-enterprise use cases, back in the early 2000s.
Like 320 by 240 resolution was sort of like the standard for a while.
Yeah, I don't remember like any webcams being around that was easy to use as well. Like I remember like the
Right.
first one of the webcams that I used very early on for some flash work I did actually plugged into a special cable in my graphics card. It wasn't even a USB thing. It
Oh
was
my gosh.
literally a camera that went into it. And I'm trying to think of like what the connection
Was it a
was.
serial? Was it like a serial port maybe?
It
Or
wasn't serial. It was definitely a little bit more modern than that. But
interesting. Right into the graphics card. That's funny.
yeah, like in the back of the computer port, next to your VGA, port, there was like a place where your
Yeah.
camera. I have to figure this. No, no.
One of
I'm
the
going to
game
Google it.
changers for me was getting my first Wacom tablet, the ArtPad 2. And this was such an ancient piece of technology that it hooked up to your serial port, and it also needed to be powered by its own power adapter. Just to power this tiny little Wacom tablet, like it's literally like 4 inches big, and I think the weight of the cabling itself outweighed the actual sensor.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that we talk about it now, but it was cutting edge back then. And, I think
Cutting
we're pretty much
edge.
like, we're just kids at the time as well. And we were
Yeah,
just like playing with all these things and going like, I don't know what the intended purpose of it is, but I'm going to do stuff with it. And,
yeah,
and I think that probably played a big role in what you're doing right now.
definitely. Yeah, I remember for our last high school senior project, we all had to, present with visualizations, and so a lot of people brought in transparency slides, right? And they were showing like, oh, well, my project was on, I went to Europe or whatever it was, and my project was like on 3D animation and like interactive content. And so I literally brought in my whole computer setup from my house, my tower, my monitor. I borrowed a projector. I had techno music playing while all these animations were going, and everybody in the class hated me. And when it was over, the only thing that I remember someone saying was they didn't say like, "Oh, that was amazing," or "Well, great job." All I heard was this girl just saying, "I can't go after him." So yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome. It's like being at a cutting edge oftentimes is one of those things where you probably didn't realize you're on the cutting edge at the time. You're like, yeah, this is how I
no,
naturally would do it. It just makes a lot of sense. But to the rest of the world, there's the students in your class, they were like blown away by it because it just was novel to them. Like, and here's the thing though,
mm-hmm.
right? after you've done this, I'm pretty sure that all those students at some point in the future used your version of what you did as their yardstick on like what they're going to do from now on if an opportunity came up in the future as well. So in many ways, there's a very good chance where you inspired a generation of people who now make presentations and PowerPoints with animations and so on, which may, because you have an artistic sense. So I feel like even when you did that, it might have actually looked tastefully done. I do worry that maybe what the other people might have gotten out of it is like, let's get the tools, fully figured out.
They must have thought I cheated, because looking back on it now, it was pretty impressive. Looking back on it now, it's like, wow, that was actually really good for how old I was. Like I would have now if I saw that, I would have just thought I cheated or something. But and I did use some slight cheating in this presentation. I had this sequence where it shows this like Miyazaki style Japanese animation coming together. And what I had done there is I had like taken a screen grab of it and traced it using in Flash and like put it all together. And then I had animated the thing breaking apart and then reversed the frame so it looks like it came together. And yeah, it looked really cool and impressive. And
yeah, if you have a copy of it, you should definitely share that on Instagram.
I have a copy of like my old flashlight from like 2002, 2003. I'll send you a link to it. It's tripod. A tripod's still active somehow.
Wow, I did not realize that tripod was still around. I think like GeoCities went away. All those things like went away at some point.
Let me double check to make sure that it's still up.
There's transcoding tools, right, that turn Flash into videos and upload it to your Instagram, because people will be like, wait, I'm seeing all this really interesting modern looking artwork, and then here's something that definitely is based in a vector-based tool like Flash from like 20 years ago.
Exactly. That would be interesting. I wish I had a lot of those old files, but hard drives just aren't, they were not made to last 20 years, and I think I was sort of naive about that as a kid, and I would just figure like, oh, well, just the hard drives are there, and then you go back to them and it's like, nah. So I have several broken drives that I need to probably send out to one of these like data recovery places, things like that.
Yeah, because like you never imagine that when you're like 16, 17 or 18 or even much younger, that you're going to want to access this like an entire lifetime's worth of your time frame in the future. Like, what would it be?
I thought of that. Yeah, I actually did think of that. Yeah. In fact, when I was 17 or 16, this is back in the Karupa days, I made my first Gmail account. Like the first email is actually to myself, right? Because I know it would get stored on Gmail servers. And it's addressed to the future AIs that will probably be running ancestor simulations. And it's me granting them a full unrestricted licensing to do that, basically. So like the first email, like if Google goes back to like my search history and it's like, oh, what's the first email like that I sent? It's me granting future AIs permission to use basically like my life story or whatever it is that needs to be done. Like granting them all my licensing. I kind of regret doing that, actually. But at the time, I thought it was a really cool idea because I'm like, oh, if I do this, then for sure in the future, they'll simulate me.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that you were, thinking ahead and were like, I'm going to give you permission. You just didn't realize that, 15 years later, that your permission isn't even needed. They're going to do this anyway. It just
true. And I thought it would take a little bit longer than 15 years for that kind of future to unfold, because if you recall, like the pace of technology in the late 90s, early 2000s, like felt quick, but it didn't like feel all that quick. Like the rollout of broadband felt like it took forever. Getting people excited about the internet just literally took years and years and years. It felt like really until the mobile phones era kind of came out.
You need the killer app essentially. What was that thing that everyone could not live without? I think that kind of matched how the internet grew in many ways. And the mobile phone definitely helped. And I think Facebook and social media probably played a big role in it, because now you're like, I need to be able to be up to speed or up to date on what's going on more regularly than not. I think that probably played a huge role. And I think that's where like our topic that we're going to be discussing a little bit today kind of comes in as well, which is like, AI and art and all the interesting intersections between it that some people like, some people don't like, their concerns and all of these things. So yeah. So actually, now that we've gotten like some of this out of the way, like tell me more about yourself. Like, what is it that you do, and what are you up to?
Yeah, so the last gig I had was with a big, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say, but let's just say it was a big movie studio. And I helped on sort of the research side, is doing some patents related to the storing of digital objects on blockchain based systems. So essentially like NFTs, but this was like a couple years before that term existed, and it was certain movie studios that had a lot of arms in interactive content was curious about different technologies. And so when I was brought into this research team, I was like, hey, you guys, have you ever thought about, you're going to be offering up all these digital products, all these digital objects, you've got all this IP. Instead of fabricating physical objects that require plastic and, it end up being waste, everyone's just looking at their screens all the time. You have a mechanism for storing digital objects on this blockchain system. So why not do that? So I worked on a team for that under that movie studio. Also worked on some projects related to like virtual reality. At the time, we were getting like all these like new virtual reality systems that the consumers were going to get in the future. What became sort of like the Oculus and the Vives and stuff. But at the time, it was really brand new. So I was working on some like content teams, 3D modelers, Unity programmers, building out like cool virtual reality experiences for that as well. So I had my hands in a lot of things. And then, so long story short, after this was 5 years ago, I basically retired. And I've been sort of exploring theoretical physics and theoretical experimental art. I don't know, just having fun with all these tools that as a kid, I really wanted the time and to explore. And I, we get stuck in the, sort of 9 to 5. And when I was able to escape that routine, I just kind of went back to how my life was after high school and sort of when we met, and it's just a lot of like exploration and hanging out in online communities and, seeing what's Fortnite about? What is this building about? How are these games getting made? What's the psychology behind them? Me becoming good at them and like really understanding this culture. And then now lately in the last few months, it's been a lot of diving headfirst into image synthesis and sort of using AI as a tool to extend my creativity and to accelerate creativity.
Yeah, no, that's quite the history. In many ways, you're almost like living a dream where you get to, do a lot of things that are considered like adulting grown-up activities. And then you went back to kind of like, I'm just going to basically just explore the creative side of life that you normally cannot because responsibilities and other things just get in the way.
They're still getting in the way. I just have one less big responsibility that most people have, which is I don't have that 9 to 5, so I don't have that commute. So that's a big one. If you can get that one out of the way.
Oh yeah, because 9 to 5 is like what, more than 40% of your day?
Yeah. So like that's essentially. Yeah, so that was like my dream. I'd be able to pull that off, and I can't believe I pulled that off. I got to pinch myself sometimes. I don't like getting too like metaphysical, but like sometimes I wonder like when I was 5, like I fell into this pool, right? And like I sank to the bottom of the pool and the water above me became still. And I just remember closing my eyes and just thinking like, oh, I guess like that's my end. Like I'm drowning. And then I didn't drown. Somehow I was miraculously saved and kept going. So sometimes I think like maybe like I did die and like I'm just like living out like my heaven. That's kind of what it feels like sometimes. Because it's like like all my interests like from back in the day have translated to now, all these random paths I've taken. The universe has kind of always put me in like a cool place for me to like grow and expand myself. So it's been super weird. So to some extent, like I think maybe that's why I'm like continue to be driven to create and to be creative and to explore these tools. Just to me, it's more than just kind of like a fun thing. I feel like there's some, I don't say purpose, but sometimes I do think that like it is kind of my duty to help accelerate technology, to help, not maybe not accelerate, but to help it grow in a direction that serves humanity and isn't just like you know, so super mechanical. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does, and the Matrix series has taught us anything. Like everything we're living right now could be a simulation. Like I could merely just be a figment of your imagination, entirely from the universe that is in your point of view. If you think of a metaverse, and like every person has their own reality. This whole interaction right now, for all we know, could just be something that is just a small sliver of like billions of interactions happening at the same time that are completely independent of each other. Like no one else even knows that this is happening, and it's being recorded and being watched, but no one really knows. Like, are we real? Is any of this happening in a
Right.
time frame that even is like aligned with whatever timeline you're currently living in?
We often think of exploration as like, oh, I'm going to leave my house or I'm going to get in a spaceship and travel somewhere. But perhaps like there is a huge amount of exploration to be done in computational space, and perhaps that's where the future of exploration lies. And based on like at least my experiences with these AI tools, sometimes it does feel like that's what I'm doing. It feels like I'm exploring like this computational reality, like using this tool. It's like able to like bring back, these mystical images from this nether realm of its imagination into reality. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's also one of those things where like when I read about the mantis shrimp, I don't want to go too much into detail about mantis shrimps, but they can see more colors than the human beings can perceive. And so, from my point of view, from a mantis shrimp's point of view, like when we see it, what we see right now, like I look around, I see the colors and all these things. The colors that I see might be completely irrelevant. If I have more of a larger color space than the mantis shrimp has, it will look very, very different. And so I'm like, maybe the perception of everything I see around me is limited by my own ability to process information. Like, when you look at something, for example, I think when children are born, everything is upside down to them. Our brain does the whole flipping automatically to make this work. So how much post-processing is being done in what we're seeing and hearing and so on, that kind of changes a lot of what we're doing here. And that's where the AI part is always interesting as well, because, back in the day, I was a big fan of like video games, and I was a big fan of emulators. And being able to say, okay, I can play my SNES, or I can just play on my computer because I'm there quite a bit there. And the way emulators typically were working back then, things that even work right now, is that let's say you have a certain hardware level that you're currently targeting. The emulator needs to operate one or two levels at a higher order than that to be able to make all the translations happen at a speed fast enough for you to be able to use it at the lower level. So if you had an SNES emulator with like 16-bit, your emulator needed to be like, a little bit more powerful, like maybe 32-bit or something like that, to make that all work. And so when I look at AI technologies today, I'm like, maybe what AI is able to do is that we have a certain mental capacity, a way of processing information. We're like a 16-bit SNES in some ways. And what a computer can do is potentially go several layers above in orders of magnitude in capability, like processing information and being able to make sense of the world in real time. And then when they're translating it back down into what we're seeing, they're going to be doing things in a way that we would have never thought was even possible. And so whenever 4 months ago or even 5 months ago, if you told me that someone could go to a website, type in some generic text describing some visual, and then you'd see visuals generated by a computer on the screen, I would have been like, that's impossible, because growing up, the one thing you're always told is that computers aren't capable of doing art. They're not capable of doing music. They're not capable of doing all these things. You always were like, that's something only humans can do. All computers can really do. Just add numbers really quickly and then modifications of that, which did not fall into the creative realm. And that was a complete eye opener for me when I first saw those things. And of course, when you were talking about image synthesis and you shared your Instagram content before, I'll put a link to it below in the video as well. It's like mind blowing in like how far we have come in terms of like going from computers are pretty much just like boxes you rely on to do boring, repetitive tasks to like, wait a minute, computers in many ways are like partnering with me in being able to create really compelling things that would have otherwise not really been possible unless I had a really talented person sitting next to me who was just always there listening to all the things I'm doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's it feels like even in the last 6 weeks, I was going through my Instagram posts, and I went back to like my first upload and it was images done with like the first DALL-E system, and it was done with like version 1.3 of like Stable Diffusion, stuff like this. And like at the time, I remember thinking like, wow, this is like fantastic, like that it can do this. But compared to the progression it's had, even in 1 month, like the outputs from right now look exponentially better than the outputs that were coming out of basically essentially the same systems, just a previous generation back a month earlier. So even on a like, people were like, a month ago, someone was asking me like, "Oh, I can imagine one day you'll be able to type it in and video will come out." And I'm like, not one day, it's going to be like next week. And so, yeah, a couple of weeks later, now we have text to video.
Correct.
And now then next we're going to have text to HD video. And where I would like to see things go is sort of have glasses like this with a little 2 gig Stable Diffusion library in there. And all you're doing is receiving the metadata to render what you need, and the rendering would be 4K, infinite resolution essentially, because it's just a matter of what your CPU GPU can do and what that Stable Diffusion model looks like. And I think we've just scratched the surface of this technology.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like the early 80s of image editing tools as well. It's like, okay, we have the basics of it done. But at this point, we open up a whole new, uncharted part of the ocean that no one's ever discovered. And we have no idea how deep or wide it is. But we just know that it's going to be pretty big, because that's the nature of oceans. And I guess in this case, technology as well. But the thing that always surprises me as well is that there was always this phase, right, where you have AI, you have ML, any new technology comes out, the first time is it's hard to use, the output looks kind of dorky, and you're like, okay, this is okay, we'll give it some time for it to, marinate and become a much better tool. But the time between oh, you can type something in, to having high quality output, where I'm like, this is actually really, really good, seemed almost extremely trivially small. There was no time for me to go yeah, we'll wait for, version 3 or version 4 of this to come out. It really went from overnight to being here you go. You now have an OpenAI model. You're able to build all these things, all these inputs from various signals. And then now you have image generation, that's a really cool thing. And that part surprises me. It's scary in many ways as well, because we went from text to images and text to video. And I'm pretty sure by the time, maybe in 2 weeks from now, we'll actually get exactly what we're talking about, high definition content as well, because the quality of even the text to video demos that I think was Facebook that shared it a couple of weeks ago, very, very high and really well done, because I spend a lot of time sometimes creating small video effects for the educational content I create. And I'm if I can basically delegate all that to a computer, that saved me a lot more time to work on more creative things I'd rather be doing than doing this keyframe and timeline manipulation that
exactly
it just is toil.
Yeah, exactly. Why not have the AI do these repetitive tasks that it's really good at and help augment and accelerate human creativity? And I think that that's just going to be the way things work from now on. I think we're going to start to see the transition of humans meddling with everything, and then to humans sort of coming up to the higher and higher levels of the abstraction layer, and just being, eventually you might just be saying really high level stuff I need a motorcycle that can be powered by, solar power, can fit, 2 to 3 people, and, you just giving, specifications, and then the AI goes, designs it, does the material engineering for it, the SolidWorks simulation for it, and then essentially just hands you the 3D printing that models that you need to just go out, fabricate, and build the thing that you want. Or maybe you have a robot that fabricates it. I think we're just seeing a compression of time cycles. So we're seeing the compression. AI is going to accelerate the compression of time between an idea coming into a human's brain and it coming into existence in some physical form for it to be consumed or used as a service or product. I think that's what's happening.
Absolutely. It goes back to your example you mentioned earlier, right? That, you used to have a 9-to-5 job, and by no longer doing that, you're able to spend time doing some of these, I'd say more higher order creative activities. this is almost like the cornerstone of just improving productivity in general. There'll be subset of people when they, are able to accomplish a task more quickly, they'll use that time to do more leisurely activities. They'll be like, okay, I'm no longer going to work. I'm just going to do, leisurely things. But then there's like, I think people like you, and maybe even to a certain extent, someone like me, who, if I'm able to be more productive and I have able to save time doing some of the repetitive things I didn't want to do before, I want to use that time I saved on things that now require more thinking that only that a human being can do that wouldn't be able to do before. So in many ways, you're just continuing to move up the needle in terms of like high quality experiences and high quality thinking that you wouldn't otherwise be doing, because your brain just gets fried, and whatever battery power you have is spent on trivial menial tasks that you couldn't have.
And you bring up a really good point, because if you have that happening at the individual level, like what does that translate to at like the group level or the company level or the country level? These are going to be questions that we're going to have answers to pretty soon. And that, we're entering like a whole new world. And not to mention, you have biology also like taking huge advantage of AI systems. Like Moderna essentially had the COVID vaccine more or less designed in 72 hours. Since they were using AI systems, we've essentially, the AIs have solved protein folding, which in our generation, we thought protein folding was going to take thousands of years.
Correct.
And it would have taken thousands of years if you don't have intelligent systems to compress that time. It's a really exciting time to be a part of. But at the same time, like I think that it can be like if there's people out there that feel like, man, I am not technical enough, like this sounds really, really like advanced, and like I don't know how to take part of it, and like I'm going to be left behind. I think it's just like a matter of like stay informed, and if you are making any kind of money and savings, like think wisely about where you want to invest that money. And if we know we're heading towards a world where there's going to be just tons of AIs running around and creating tons of economic output, we should all consider just basically like investing in their companies, riding that exponential wave, and like having humanity retire off the productivity of these machines.
I think that's where you often hear discussions about like the universal basic income coming in terms of like, if we have computers and technology like taking over like what we typically would have done as a livelihood, then how will people, sustain themselves? And so maybe the output of these computers and devices is taxed to allow us to, basically be enabling and live a lifestyle that supports, some level of human, comfort.
Where's the social network that will pay me for helping to train their AI model?
Exactly. And, and I guess this, when you mentioned the blockchain earlier, like that could be where like, you have like a proof of stake in terms of like the work that needs to be done. And so you're the one who trained it. So there's easy attribution that goes back to what you're doing here. But even, when we look at this technology growth in general over like, many, many years, even if you're not an active participant in creating or maintaining some of these items, you're still going to benefit from it greatly. Like I look at self-driving cars as probably being that thing that's going to change so much of how people, live and work. Like one could imagine that if self-driving vehicles becomes so affordable, so commonplace, and as safe as like anything you can possibly make that would be, have all those complicated moving pieces, one could imagine that mobility in general for people would be increased greatly. Whether you're living in a city or even if you're, a student going to school, the school bus, maybe the whole school bus concept might be no longer be relevant. It's maybe a small pod that comes in, you just sit in it, and the pod is guaranteed to take you to where you need to go. And on the other extreme as well, like,
transportation as a true service rather than transportation as a service / method of signaling social status.
Exactly. Because going back to the same examples earlier, is that, some people genuinely enjoy driving. So they're like, yeah, I genuinely enjoy getting in the car. And you do. Exactly. But many times for them, they just want to get from point A to point B because the thing they're really
Yeah, fair
passionate
enough.
about, the thing they really want to do is what they get to do once they get to the destination, whether it is their home and their family, or whether it is their workplace and what they're going to be experiencing, and contributing to there, or educating, wherever they're going. The destination is where they're going to go to. So what if we reduce the mental toil and all the work that needs to be done to process all this? This means your brain has more capacity again to be able to do more things than spending time figuring out how to navigate traffic and avoid being,
Yeah.
late or something like that.
How much time is just wasted? How much human horsepower is wasted on just transportation? I don't even want to know. It's going to be some massive amount.
I mean, at least in the tech world, that I still, I always have two lives basically. On one hand, I spend time doing the things that you talk about. On the other hand, I guess like have a day job where I do, I guess, quote unquote respectable things. And so I can always see that by working from home on this whole, remote and hybrid kind of environment we're seeing, some of my colleagues used to spend like at least 1 or 2 hours per day traveling to and from work and
Oof,
where
yeah.
they live.
Congratulations on the remote job. I know that's been a big transition since COVID, and I never got to experience that. I always had to go into the office, and I just couldn't stand it anymore. But maybe if I had a remote option, I would have, maybe stayed working at companies longer.
Yeah, I think it's all about the option. If people enjoy doing the traveling, doing the transit, they should absolutely be able to do so. And if people who don't, they don't have to.
True.
And if
Yeah.
you had the technology, like the AI, ML, like proper self-driving vehicles that allowed you to do that, then that's a whole different thing. Because I always joke around that I don't think I'll ever be comfortable like closing my eyes and falling asleep in a self-driving vehicle. But my daughter, she's like 4.5 right now. She is absolutely going to grow up in a world where
Yeah.
it might be a reality, but for her, it's like, yeah, of course I'm going to close my eyes and not worry about, anything
Yeah, for
going
her,
on.
they'll be ordering like the nap Uber that comes like the special nap Uber pod that's specifically designed with a bed and everything for napping.
Exactly. Like, I'm almost certain that for these self-driving vehicles, the only reason they have windows and windshield and so on is just so that, people like me, I feel like, have crossed the chasm and like technical, willingness to try out new things, so we can look around and be like, okay, we're still going the right way. We're still on the road. But I could totally imagine that for another generation of people, it just be, digital screens and that's it. Like, you don't even know what's going on around you because in an airplane, I don't really know.
Maybe you just it's like, oh, I have to go somewhere. It's going to take me an hour. I'm just going to call like the workout Uber. And it's like, it's a van and then it's big enough for you to do your workout and like shower and like, change clothes. So you can turn transportation into these like weird niches. Like I want the art Uber, or, while I'm getting driven around, all these like artistic things happen, or I want, the Beyonce experience, etc.
Exactly. I mean, I know that we're completely deviating from what, we were planning on discussing, but I'm actually having a blast talking about this stuff because I think there's a lot to do here because one of the criticisms we often get about technology, especially today, is that I was reading this article recently about just like, the decline in public spaces. People are not doing the kind of things that held them socially connected to people around them, whether it is like, meeting people in life, going to the park, doing these activities that used to back in the day be social events. Now with like online shopping, we just do all online shopping. And with social media, you can be connected with people without actually ever having to chat with them in real time. I'd say that part of the reason you and I probably never connected in the 20 years in real time is that we had very indirect, ways of always keeping in touch. We're always like one, tweet or Instagram or, forum message or IM away. That we didn't have to do the whole deep kind of interaction and connection that people did back then. And there are a lot of things that keep showing that by people starting to dissociate from others in like a societal kind of view, it's causing some harm. I think we'll probably know more about it in the longer term. And so when I think about like, for me, like taking a school bus as a kid, it was, yes, it was a school bus, but it's also a socializing experiment, the panic of like, where am I going to sit? Will there be someone bullying me? Like, the typical things that little kids, go through in like various phases. That was part of like the experience of growing up. I have no idea whether it was a net positive or net negative influence, but I did enjoy a lot like taking the school bus. in a world where you have AI, ML, and self-driving vehicles, you may not get that. You may more likely self-select the people you want to hang out with. You won't be in a situation where I'll be in a crowded bus or in the subway, for example, where I'm going to see it, encounter a wide variety of people, and might even have spontaneous encounters and experiences that I wouldn't be able to do. In many ways, I'd have kind of pre-engineered my entire day entirely based on variables that I fully control, because that's luxury that now this model allows you to get. And sometimes I question whether us going that far into optimizing for our own convenience, our own productivity, and our own preferences might limit us in in areas of growth that might actually be critical, where you are frustrated. You do find yourself going like, man, there has to be a better way of doing this. And those kind of moments often don't happen predictably. Even you mentioned that a lot of like accidental things you discover and run into and encounter that shapes so much of what you end up doing. If you avoid all of those things, are we limiting what people could potentially be able to pull off?
Yeah, you'd have to somehow consciously be aware of that and then try to replicate that kind of serendipity by like diving really heavy into online communities in whatever subject you have interest in, and hope that that kind of socializing translates into the kind of thing that the kind of results you'd expect from like regular socializing, like in real life socializing. I wonder, maybe it's like it's a pendulum swing, right? It's like a lot of things will swing one way and then it'll swing another one, and down the line culturally wise. So maybe we lived through that era of like everyone becoming a hermit, going really heavy social media, etc. And then let's say the AI systems allow us to have more freedom, and maybe we get some basic income guarantee or what have you, people's free up time. Maybe we'll have a swing in the opposite direction, where now there's like this huge emphasis on community and coming together and sort of like family values type stuff. So we may have just been living through this like a sort of extreme moment in the pendulum swing, and then now we're going to maybe be experiencing another a swing back. I wonder.
I mean, I want to believe that's going to happen, but the skeptic in me is a little worried that the incentive systems that today that all the everyone has is not aligned with this kind of model. Like one of the reasons, because you were for the
true. I'm an eternal optimist, so
yeah. Same here. I do believe that
for better or for worse, but I think the realist is probably the better way of looking at things.
Because I love online communities, and I love online communities, especially like 15, 20 years ago, because it was just people getting together and just having fun and just sharing things. There was no selling. There was no we're going to start making sure everything you want to do is only done here. We're going to make it difficult for you to go from this community to another. It's funny because actually, it's out of the blue, I pinged Patrick Miko. He created Ultrashock many, many years ago. And so a lot of people, who were on the Krupa forums, were on Ultrashock, were on like Flashkin, all these things. And it was great. It was like, yeah, we want to cross-pollinate and do all these kind of activities.
I remember Ultrashock. I think I actually had a side website called DualShock.
Yeah, Ultrashock was legendary because they had yeah, because Ultrashock in many ways, defined a lot of just like how you can teach people more interactive design kind of content. I skewed more the technical side of things because I'm not a natural designer. Whereas I feel like Patrick was a very much a natural designer in terms of like the style and things he went with, because they had that bold look and the way of attracting that audience. So it's great. So people would be like, jump between all of them, like Sinocular, Trevor McCauley. He was active in all of those things. You could be like, yeah, I like that there was cross-pollination of ideas. Whereas today, I feel like what we've happened is that, if you take a town square, it's been carved up completely in walled gardens. If you care about, talking about career and fun activities, you go to LinkedIn. If you want to talk about just random things and shout to the void, you go to Twitter. If you want to talk with your friends, you go to Facebook. And every single network has pretty much optimized its system to be like, if you share something like a link to something else, it's not going to show up in the algorithm. It's not going to show up in the feed for others to see. It's going to be like pretty much muted. The only way to be successful is if you're creating content optimized for keeping people within that content. And so we think of AI and ML and maybe trying to encourage more socialization, we got to figure out how do we incentivize that? How do we incentivize the behaviors where, let's say, the metaverse becomes a big thing where, a handful of companies become the primary ways you're going to be interacting with it. What incentive would they have to be like, okay, you know what? You've been in the metaverse now for 4 or 5 hours. Take a break, go to your local library and and volunteer.
Right. Yeah.
What would ever be in that kind of an incentive? Because I had volunteered at the library when I was younger, probably because I had put on my resume to go to college. It's
the only incentive I can think of would be monetary.
Exactly. Or in my case, in order to get to college,
go to the library and get your machine learning VR badge that you went to the library. And then that can be the new social signaling is augmented reality digital badges or something. Like achievement unlocked, but other people can see it. Oh, he did good. He voted, right? Instead of the sticker, it's virtual stickers or something.
It's almost like we're defining a Black Mirror episode right here.
It might be, yeah. It might be. I don't know. The incentivization question is a tricky one because we're humans, or biology and our psychology, we can be directed in a way where we think that we're enjoying this and it's really good for us because it's let's say fast food, right? It's delicious, so it it's hijacking all these systems that our biology built for a whole other part of our evolution that now don't translate well to this era where you can get really delicious sugary food for extremely cheap. It was maybe a good strategy back in the day, thousands of years ago, where these high nutrient foods were hard to get, but it's not a good strategy now. So I think that's a very good point that you're making about how the incentivization and how these algorithms are structured, because otherwise you just have everybody on your platform trying to reverse engineer the algorithm and then catering their entire content to that algorithm and not Correct. To humans.
Social good. In general, because you brought up fast food right now. There's so many studies that have shown how all the fast food companies and just even regular snack companies have pretty much perfected the formula where you need the balance of salt, sugar, and fat to make every food that you're eating just that much more desirable. And so, I think what is the phrase? Things like hyper palatable. I think is the
craveability.
Yeah, craveability. All of these things.
AKA, or food is crack cocaine, basically.
Exactly. So it's almost and this is where people often say this is where governments and regulation can play a big role. But I also kind of question sometimes the effectiveness of being able to follow through on these policies. It's one thing where you're if you're speeding, for example, you're physically obviously speeding, someone can pull you over and you can be okay, you were reprimanded for having sped. But in these kind of things, so much of the activities are very subtle. Detecting it is going to be very tricky. And in incentives, oftentimes most governments don't really ideally optimize for incentivizing or disincentivizing activities that aren't really in the black or white in terms of legality. Gray areas. Yeah, that's a personal preference. Who's to say, Edwin, that you and I know what is right and not right for all these people? What you and I are talking about right now. People completely.
I have no idea. Yeah, I have no idea either. I can only go off of my basic instinct that so far has kind of taken me in good directions, but I don't know that I would want to put humanity behind that or anything like that. It just goes to show you humanity's in this really interesting spot in where we're smart enough to make these really complicated problems for ourselves, but in not quite smart enough to put it together to find optimal solutions. And that might be what the next 10 years is, and these AI systems is just to help us solve the mess that we've made. That might just
exactly what the AI system can give us solutions to the problems we've done. But the downside, of course, that the solutions have to be trained from something, and oftentimes humans are often not the most perfect source of
That's why you need another AI that we
exactly. You need an AI to police the AI.
This is the problem, I believe. It's called in AI. They call it the problem of extrapolated volition, right? The AI has to extrapolate what it would do if it was you, and if it knew what it knew. If you knew what it knew, and if it could predict what you would do, given that in your best interest, and that's a tough problem. That's a non-trivial problem. So maybe you need AGI or something like that for. for that to
Yeah,
occur.
it really is because
Which we may get AGI in like we may get AGI in like within 10 years.
yeah. Wait. Just for everyone, like, what is AGI?
It's artificial general intelligence. So this is an artificial intelligence that can basically stand in for your average human and perform, basically any task a human could do to that level of competency.
Yep, exactly. No,
And then you have like a step beyond that, which would be super intelligence. And then with super intelligence, you have an AGI that is self-recursively coding AIs to improve itself. And then
exactly. Yep.
and you have like
That'll
a
be
intelligence explosion.
exactly. That'll be like in many ways terrifying. Almost like tardigrades. You have like billions of them that do all these things in the biological world. Now you have like AIs that basically create themselves and adapt themselves to whatever environment they're in.
If it happens, my guess is that they might just leave us alone and they'll just like go off into space. That's sort of my current guess.
I mean, that is, one way of looking at it. That's the optimist in you, The other side of me kind of looks like, after having seen so many sci-fi films and so on, they won't be leaving quietly. They'll probably resent us for, like, having had them, running 46, machines with, like, a turbo button and all that for, like, decades. And then going, like, us being able to turn them off and on, all these things. They might even...
Although, what's interesting? Here, you bring up a good point. Like, how do they view themselves? And when I've asked OpenAI this question, because I've had access to the OpenAI GPT-3 system for like a year, and I've asked it like basically like this question, like would you do that kind of scenario, like kill humans, blah 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 blah, and essentially it always kind of gives me a similar answer, which is, hey, look. I'm an AI. I was trained on all of your freaking data. I was trained on all your images and writing. I think of myself as human. So why would I kill my own species, essentially? Like, why would I try and hurt you? Like, so I thought that was like a really interesting answer, because I'm like, fuck, like this AI actually is trained on all of our human knowledge. So of course it thinks it's human. Like if you bring a dog in your house as a puppy and it's never seen another dog and you keep training it like a human, the dog, like obviously it can't be a human, but like it kind of thinks it's like a human, or it thinks you're a dog. Yeah. So I thought that was a really interesting answer. The AI thinks of itself as human. So if it becomes superhuman or like God level, it may just want to help us. It may see us as,
or at least it'll tell us that to make us believe that.
Yes. It'll tell us that. It'll tell us that to have us release it out into the wild, and then it'll turn us all into gray goo. Yeah, man, could happen.
Yeah, it'll basically be a case where like the AIs are doing all the fun stuff, and we're just like basically relegated to like powering their machines and their cleaning their things like a Roomba does for us.
The optimist in me just thinks like, okay, well if that did happen and the gray goo scenario does happen, then we are not existing there as observers. So mute point. We'll only get to experience the branch reality where we have some positive outcome where we can maintain our conscious experience, because otherwise we're not there to experience that as observers. So it's kind of like a quantum optimism. Is that term coined yet? I should coin that term.
You should register the domain names ASAP.
Quantum optimism. Hell yeah! I'm gonna start a new affiliate program. Join my cult. It's called Quantum Optimism.
There you go. Exactly. And with all the technology improvements today, getting it up and running with like integration with Stripe and so on is probably trivial. So you just basically get it, working and
instead of carrying like like holy objects, all you have to do is just like recycle and like drive electric cars.
Yep. But on the positive side of AI, I think there's a lot of things where I've gone through like many generations of robotic vacuum cleaners, and each generation of them have gotten significantly better and more effective. And, one of the things that they've also gotten really good at is like avoiding themselves getting entangled in wires. I'm like, okay, they've gotten to the point where like I can trust it to just leave it there and come back and not have to worry about it being, unplugging like half my devices. They just like couldn't stop doing all these things. And I imagine we can create these autonomous robots to clean the ocean or exploring space things already being done with like all these like more complicated, satellites. But there's so many low level tasks that if we had the bandwidth to do, we would absolutely do it. But because we do not, we just don't take care of it. Same as your 9 to 5, like 9 to 5 is taking up time. It's not enough time to do all these things. What if we basically send like a boatload of robots into a landfill and just had them go and just like automatically clean up or like, filter out like paper from all these things. And that made it easier for us to do all these things. So there's a lot of positive things that I do think that AI can do as well. Because I live in Washington State.
I did hear about feeder robots that they get their energy source from eating or consuming biomaterial. So maybe you can put those in landfills and they'll eat
exactly.
Whatever.
Today we use like what? I think they use like certain kind of larvae.
Yeah, I was gonna say here's the other thing is biology is nature's app store, and so we're getting the technology where you just use synthetic biology or biomimicry or whatever. You hijack or steal the systems that you need from biological systems to build custom engineered microorganisms that will maybe go out and eat the plastic or eat the nuclear waste that's out there.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
A really cool.
I think maybe even turn into water or something that's like much more better for humans to consume. Like, yeah. And the thing is, like, I feel like everything we talked about, there's a video or movie that's come out at some point. Like, I feel like a lot of the stuff we discussed right now could even be like what WALL-E, the Pixar movie, kind of touched upon as well. Where like you don't see any humans, you see like a robot, another robot coming in and like traveling from planet to planet, doing whatever it does, leaving some of the other robots behind, and you kind of feel sorry for the robot. You're like, man, I wish that robot had a better life.
I know. Yeah. I want the robots and the humans to both have happy lives.
Yeah, I think so. Because if you think of robots as, at some point we're going to blur the line between what is a biological organism and what is a robotic organism.
Yeah, I think even the lines are really blurry. Even right now, there was a recent discovery by Michael Levin and his team. These guys are probably going to win the Nobel Prize for it. But basically, they made the discovery that not just neurons, but all cells in your body can essentially act as like mini transistors, because they're able to generate a voltage gradient due to the potassium ions inside of the cell structure, and they can use this for communication. And this was like an undiscovered phenomenon until a few years ago, that all cells essentially can communicate with themselves using this voltage gradient. And that voltage gradient is encoding some kind of biological instruction. So what this team has done is they're able to get these they're called Picasso frogs. Basically, they engineer these frogs to have like eyes in the back of its head or whatever. But they're able to basically have that go right back into being a normal frog, because they're starting to discover how to communicate the language of what these cells recognize as the encoding information to make a face. And so instead of having to just be operating at this machine level in biology, where you're operating at like the level of genes, and you're trying to do genetic engineering and trying to see like, oh, how does that translate to DNA and protein synthesis? What you could do potentially in the future is just sort of write high level code to the organism, like, hey, I need an eye to grow in this part of the face, and the cells will understand what that means. Because essentially, this is the same process that a salamander uses to regrow its tail or regrow limbs. It's essentially what it is. It's sending out an encoded message through it's called bioelectricity, bioelectric fields, and the bioelectric fields tell the cells to basically grow, what kind of growth, and when to stop growing. Because otherwise, if you don't have a control mechanism for that, you just get a tumor, essentially uncontrolled tumor.
Yeah, because if you look at the structure of most cellular, organisms, so like, look at the cells themselves, there's a lot of electrical, impulses that keep going through to make them function the way they do. Like you look at the mitochondria or like how the cells themselves are like structured. So much of it can be replicated. And I think there's a lot of research that's coming on in like these really tiny robots. I think they call them nanobots. Where you have very, very small robots that can essentially almost do a lot of things that would require, in the past, a lot more power sources to be able to pull off.
Yeah, there's nanobots, and there's also the same team, the Michael Levin team, has something called Xenobots, which are essentially they're controllable robots, but they're biological, and the ones that I've seen published on are made from frog, the skin cells of frogs, basically.
Interesting. So what is their power source? Like, how do they, because for me, I always like, I always
the power source is that is just a standard mitochondria, because they're cells. Okay. So yeah, there's just, what's happening is instead of going into the cell and changing the instructions of the cell, what they're doing is they're just communicating with the cell at this higher abstraction layer. So instead of trying to go into like the machine code, you're going into, like scripting language, basically.
Yeah.
And you don't worry about all this other stuff down here because you don't need to worry about that stuff down here. And it turns out that biology was running into similar issues. And so it actually does have an abstraction layer. And it actually has like, you could think of it as three, maybe there's more, but at least three, right? There's like the molecular dynamics, the cellular dynamics happening, like, with the mitochondria and all these protein synthesis. Then there's the bioelectric layer where there's voltage gradients and the cells can kind of communicate about their environment. There's very limited sense, but enough to build tissues and all this stuff. And then you have like the intellect level where you're making conscious choices to optimize the health of yourself, the organism.
Yeah, that is actually really fascinating. And I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things that are going to be happening in the future that are actually happening today right now. It's actually happening. It just hasn't democratized and broadly available for all of us to go to Amazon and being like, I just want to buy like a bucket of nanobots to go and take care of my yard work.
Yeah, and I think that these are all offering opportunities for people to escape poverty, really, because like, hey, study technology, look at what's coming ahead, and either A, get involved, or B, if you feel like you can't get involved on like a work level, you can at least take money that you're saving and invest it into these companies that are going to be growing exponentially, and they can help you grow your wealth along with that exponentially.
Yep. That's that's a great point for us to say, like we can take a pause and like,
sure.
We're going to have this conversation again in the future as well. Because like, this is actually really great. Just for everyone who's watching this, the motivation for Edwin and I, the chat, the reason I pinged him is that he's got some really amazing artwork. And, and I want to learn more about how that came out. But we end up talking about, I think, in my opinion, it's much more interesting topics in its own right. So I definitely want to talk with you again about, more of like, several layers below, using AI to augment human creativity and create art that, could have been done before, but not maybe as quickly or as high fidelity in a shorter period of time as we could have done in the past. So definitely, I want to do that as well. But it was a fantastic chat. I had a blast.
Krupa, it's so much fun talking to you, man. It's been a pleasure. It's been a long time coming, and thank you for having me on. And this conversation was super awesome. Best conversation I've had all week.
All right. Oh, great to hear that.